Hi, everybody. Welcome to a very first episode of The Good, the Bad, the Data. For our debut episode, we are diving into a deceptively simple but incredibly powerful concept, the data culture. We live in a world where data is everywhere: dashboards, KPIs, reports, analytics. But having data isn't the same as having a data culture. So, to talk more about data, I have my boss here with me. But for the rest of the world, he is better known as the president of Decision Foundry. Anoop, nice to meet you, and welcome to our show.
Thanks, Jomal. Thanks for having me on the show.
And to set the stage, let's go right to the core. I understand you've helped Decision Foundry. I was here when you were setting up the entire BIA process to get the podcast going. Let's talk a little bit about the basics, right? Can you give us a little, can you walk us through what data culture means to you?
Sure. Um, See, I think there are a lot of different definitions that you'll find online about data culture. But the one that I generally look at is an organization where people are collectively believe that data is a core part of their decision-making process, right? To keep it simple. Of course, there are a few things that does matter a lot more than others. So let's look at two core parts of what a data culture would essentially mean to organizations, right? So there is hard side of it, which means that it's what your fundamentals are. So it starts with data accessibility. The key question, right? So does your organization have access to the right level of information that they actually need to make a day-to-day decision, right? So that it starts with there. And then the next step is, does your organization people have data literacy in place, right? So which means it's very simple. When people think that, data literacy means people should be able to model, write SQLs, I think it's quite the contrary. People should be able to, analyze very simple data set, read it, and then interpret it, and then be able to communicate it, right? So that's part of your data literacy. And then comes your data-driven decision making. I think this is where a lot of organizations tend to not form a data loop, right? When it's important for us to create that data loop so that data feeds into your decision making and then you reassess the data and goes back in a loop, right? So that is essentially what completes the hard side of your data culture. So then there's also a soft side of it. I think there are many attributes to soft side of it. It's attitude, it's your ability to uh, take decisions based on data is not just having the all these skills, but also a willingness. How are you rewarded? Is that something that you learn from peers? Does it pass on from your leadership? Does your leadership appreciate it? So there's a lot of different things. But to put it in perspective, I think the key three core indications that we look at from a soft side is leadership modeling, in the sense like our leaders, a model decision makers who are data driven, and then you have teams collaborating with each other using the same, you know, framework of data and the same data access, etc. Right? So the collaboration is something that you'll have to look into very closely. And then, the fundamental overarching piece of all this is all the data that you have access to, does your teams trust it, right? So I think that those are some of the key soft side of data culture.
It's a lot of new information, as in the hard side, soft side. It's a lot of new terms that I'm hearing myself as well. Could you talk a little bit about data loop? It's a completely new concept. The way I see it.
Sure. I mean, see, data loop is nothing but does your, do you use your data for decision making, right? And then, you generally don't stop at that, right? So you make a decision. Sometimes you start with a lot of hypothesis when you start anything for that matter, right? So let's take a very key example of how marketers can use this data loop to keep improvising their, output, right? Or, the kind of output that they can see, the business outcomes they can see. For example, let's say a digital marketer he's doing a paid campaign, and the essential part here is for you to, look at this campaign as a outcome for the business, right? Let's say your campaign wants to reach to more people, and hence you would get more leads, right? So that's
Yeah.
typically, very high level concept, right? So then you're going to spend a certain amount, and you say that, okay, I'm going to get, let's say, one lead for every 1,000 impressions, for example.
Right.
Impression is nothing but, how many people saw your ads. And then you have various different stages in the funnel. The end of it is the person would come and fill a form or buy a product, put it in the cart, check out from the cart, etc. Right? So depending on what your business does and how do you look at conversion, you want to increase that conversion. And let's say hypothesis is that every 1,000 impressions, every 1,000 people who see the ad, one person of that would buy, right? So that's pretty much what it looks like. So now, if you look at, this is the hypothesis you have made. So that's the first stage of your loop, right? So then you go on to your second stage of the loop, which is now you're setting up all these targets, right? So you're creating all these metrics. So then you'll start being a little more deeper, diving deeper into your process, which is like, what are these different stages going to look like for my conversion? And you're going to set targets, goals that you want to achieve, and then create that whole framework to measure your success, right? So because this is not the end of the campaign, right? So you're starting the campaign, so laid out all your metrics. So the third step you would take is to start now, as your campaign kicks off, and you're going to start, analyzing all this data and seeing that what are my targets, what were my goals, have I achieved it? If not, can I start really putting my effort into understanding why I couldn't reach it? Or if I'm doing overperforming, then where is it going well, right? So
Right.
getting to this key pointers is very important. Like, for example, a segment of customers who are more likely to buy a product. Now you want to start looking at making those decisions, which leads into the fourth and final stage, which is you're going to decide, okay, now I'm looking at segment A, which is buying more of my products or services. So I'm going to put more money in there, right? So now you made a decision. Now you're going to start bringing back those loop again, because every time you're looking at data and things are unraveling, you're making more and more hypotheses, and you're going to test
Right.
those hypotheses and continue to improvise your, decision making ability, right? So this is what the data loop is all about. So how data feeds into your decisions and how you can continuously improve. And I think most organizations which are very well, I mean, which are known for their data culture, would try to follow this data loop, right? So that is the definition of how collectively teams are working and, increasingly adopting data to make those decisions for their business.
That makes sense. Again, so essentially, you use the data that you have to create a hypothesis, extrapolate
Mhm.
on it or extend on it, see how it's working. And then based on that, again, it creates another loop, as in, how your
Yeah.
action happened. Based on that, you further, extend on it. All right. That brings me back to my next question. How important is having a centralized data set? Or, I mean, I understand the hard
Hmm.
side of it is mostly ensure that you have a, centralized or a, a single source of truth for the entire data set.
Hmm.
Could you expand on it? How does it work and what's the importance of it?
Yeah, I think, I mean, like you said, right, it's the foundation of your data culture. This is a very hard aspect of it in the sense like we as engineers, we deal with this a lot, because you have to build a strong data foundation for your teams, right? And I think the leadership needs to realize, investing on these data platforms is going to fuel their, processes. It's going to fuel their people to take better decisions. It's also going to fuel all your AI, uh, that's coming up in the future, right? So there are already a lot of AI platforms that are being fueled by the data and will be fueled by the data, right? So to close the gap of a generic AI to more specific AI that is going to drive, some productivity for your own organization, you need to have your own first party, second party, or third party data, which is in your platforms, right? So I think that's very critical for organizations to realize that the data foundation, a unified platform, is not just something good to have, but it's a must have for all organizations of all sizes. The study shows that only 16% of large organizations within the US have can confidently say that they have a strong data foundation, right? I think most people do agree, like about 75% of the companies do feel like their decision making is fueled by data. But I feel like, is it really making the maturity, if you look at it? I think that's where, the 16% comes into place. A lot of organization is still, working in silos. And we see that on a day-to-day basis. And we are helping most of our clients to, get that unified data platform ready for their, consumption as, just ongoing operations or even fueling AI agents, etc. Right? So
16%, that's a pretty small number. Interesting. And the second aspect of the data literacy, right? As in,
Mhm.
is it something that extends to the entire organization, or is it more focused towards, let's say, the senior management, or let's say sales and marketing, or something like that? Or do you think it needs to be the entire organization, regardless of the level they are at, they have to be
Mhm.
data literate for, for an organization to make even impact in the market?
Like I said, I think data culture is where all the teams are literate about how to use data, right? So like I said, there are three steps, right? So can you read data? Can you analyze it? And then can you communicate it? I think these are three important steps for data literacy. And like I said, we don't have to teach people to code. We don't want people to, create these sophisticated forecasting models, and all that stuff, right? So we need to make sure that most people in your organization can look at data in the spirit of what the outcome should look like, right? So for example, let's look at this digital marketers example, right? So where they will have to start looking at data to, let's say I really want my business outcome is to increase leads, right? Now, if you are able to analyze data which is available to you, and then can you also acquire more data which is not accessible, not probably in the system, right? So which is overlaying, like, was there a event that happened, external forces, for example, right? So is if there was a hurricane, or does your marketing get affected by it? Because there are less people buying your product or services during that time. I mean, I'm just giving out examples, right? But you need to be able to start looking at data and making sense of it, and just not go by a number that's displayed, right? So that is where I think most of the times we see that a lot of dashboards that we build are consumed in a way that might not be effective for the business, right? So we need
Right.
people to understand that there is more to it, and I think teaching these kind of basic skills is very important. And they also need to start communicating to their teams, creating accountability, saying that, hey, we see that there is less traction on this segment of the customers who are viewing the ads, but they're not taking action. What can we do differently, right? So asking
Right.
these questions, and I think these are some of the things that we need to inculcate and make sure that our people are at all levels, right? So I think what to answer your second part of the question is, does it only apply to certain functions in your organization? I think a lot of functions like marketing, sales, operations, finance are some of the key, you know, functions in the organization that are more data savvy than others, I would say, because their outcome is directly driven by the business, right? So But if you see support functions like HR or few other like product dev, they are not as data savvy, but they are getting there, right? So it also depends on the size of the organization, the nature of work they're doing, and stuff like that. But I think it's very critical nowadays with the competitive landscape for everyone to have access to data and be literate on data, right? So,
Yeah, and it's not always about the impressions or the cost or the clicks and the
hmm
conversions over there. Right? For HR, it might be a different set of metrics that they're looking at.
hmm
So you kind of have answered my next question, but how can we say someone is data literate? As in, and do you say, for example, I mean, are we talking about someone, who can make decisions based on the data? Do we call them data literate? And now that, we've alluded to AI quite a lot, do you think AI will take over some of these or some of the decision making, some of these human interactions completely irrelevant? How do you see AI coming in over here?
absolutely. I think AI is going to play a major role in data literacy, right? So I think that's one of the things that's going to be revolutionized in the next few years, which is already done, right? So I think a lot of BI that we used to do before was mostly, like dashboards, for example, or insights that were given or driven through some algorithms. Now it's conversational BI, right? So that's the future of how people are going to consume data. The good part about literacy is that you don't have to learn some of the basic skills that you had to before, where you would have to crunch some numbers, create some secondary metrics or guided metrics or guided assumptions, etc. I think all this is going to be kind of powered by AI. I wouldn't say AI is going to take over the aspect of decision making, or the some parts of business will be still run by humans, but what will happen in the future is the AI will be powering you a lot of insights that you would traditionally humanly take a longer time. For example, you can throw a large Excel sheet with large database and ask AI to, analyze the data and come up with patterns, right? Which is hard for a human to do it until unless you're probably a good, mathematician, or you know how to learn how to code, learn statistical modeling and stuff like that. So I think that's where the AI is going to definitely power you. So it's actually going to make it more data literacy as a fundamental is required, because you still need to understand or even validate what AI is presenting it to you, right? So that's still a requirement. But I would say that, because of AI, we would be looking at a lot more organization being more data savvy and making decision based on data because of the AI. But also, most technical leaders today believe that AI can only have a good output if the input is right, right? So, which brings back to the same point. The first fundamental aspect of building a data culture is having a strong data foundation.
All right. So, yeah, focusing on, I'll move on to
hmm
my next level of questions. Again, the irony isn't lost on me that we're talking about data culture and I'm doing the age-old method of, the book, the notepad and the pen. But one of the key things that I've noted down over here is the soft aspect, and we talked about leadership modeling, right?
hmm
Could you talk a little bit about it and, maybe give me a personal example, the way that we did it with this foundry or something, so that, it resonates a lot better with the audience over here.
Absolutely. So I think, like I said, I think one of the things that we realized a little late as well is that we do a lot of data systems, data foundation building. We build a lot of, uh, you know, some cultural aspect as well for our clients through advisory. What we realized is we don't use that framework as much as we do it for our clients, right? So, I mean, that's something that we wanted to change a few years back. When we were creating Decision Foundry, we took a very deliberate approach of saying that we should get good at forecasting. Now, what I mean by forecasting is, we need to understand what our business is going to look like um, from a year now, from a 3 years. now, right? So it's easy to forecast a week. It gets a little harder to forecast a month, and it gets harder and harder as the period extends, right? There are a lot of unknowns. So that's where we started looking at how do we put a framework in place that can get better over time as we move towards, having more and more data, right? So that's what we deliberately took an approach. And like I said, leadership modeling is when leaders understand the importance of data-driven decision making and starts, putting that in part of your day-to-day conversations, day-to-day meetings, etc. Right? So let's take a very specific example. So in my previous role, so I was leading the operational teams, and we being a consulting firm, we looked at what our functional flow would look like in the sense like how does the business happen, right? So basically, in a very simple term, we are a consulting firm. So we are paid on hourly basis. So you sell 1 hour, you deliver 1 hour, and then you get paid for an hour, right? So this is
Yeah.
three simple steps. So now, if you look at how are we doing in different functions, right? So now, like I said, the first aspect is modeling, which I think leadership realized that we have to start looking at numbers. We have to start making decisions based on data. Now we have to get better at forecasting, right? So now we have to get all the functions into this map, right? So which means marketing and sales are going to be contributing to generating those Rs. Then you have project management, customer success, delivery teams, which are delivering those hours, right? Once it's produced, and then you deliver, and then you need finance and other support functions to make sure that that money comes into the bank, right? So this is how
Yeah.
you look at your, you know, your flow map, right? Basically, it's like green light, green light, green light, right? So all of
Yeah.
it to be green. Now you need to start seeing how can you influence this as teams, right? As part of leadership. So one thing we started doing is having these numbers or these three lights on our daily stand-ups at a leadership level. Now, if you see, the first light is red, then obviously the rest of the lights are going to
Yeah.
be red, right? So if not today, they're going to start becoming red in the future. So now you have an opportunity to change that first red into green before the others get affected. So we started making decisions based on, okay, now we see that we are not closing as much. How do we do that? What can we change? Can other teams come and help, the sales and marketing to get more? So I think that is how we started modeling data-driven decision making within the organization. This is one quick example. And within a very good example is within the operations team, which was my light, right, which is the mid light. We saw that we are not able to get all of them to be at a certain level of utilization as we wanted to. So what we did is started to, bring that up in my meetings with the leadership, and the leadership would bring it in their teams with their teams and with their peers. Everybody starts looking at their own metrics, right? So the top metric is passed on all the way to the bottom, and everybody is looking at, okay, you know what, I'm not utilized for 40 hours a week. How do I get there? So then you start scouting for more work, or talking to your clients and generating more work, etc. Right? So over time, we started to see the effect where our utilization started to climb, and then people started taking decisions on where they want to invest their teams time, their individual time, etc. I think this is how you drive a culture, right? So that is a soft aspect of saying that if you are very clear about what the outcome should look like, and make sure that the data is available, which is another part that I was talking about, is we built our own data foundation for it, where these reports were accessible across all levels. I think that's what drew that whole change, and we could potentially see that effect. And I think since then we have been using that model. We've been, kind of driving those key KPIs across these teams, which definitely has helped us to start forecasting. So today we know exactly what we are going to do for 3 months, 1 year, and 3 years. Right? So there is something that we call as big picture, where all these metrics are available and we are tracking it. We have this conversation on a quarterly basis. Are we going to achieve this? Why wouldn't we achieve it? Things to change in business, but we are adopting and trying to use data to make those appropriate decisions on where to invest, where not to. And similarly, people are learning to understand where can I go where there is more projects, can I learn a skill, etc. Right. So I think it's the whole organization working towards the growth of the of these numbers, which eventually will grow the organization.
That makes perfect sense. So, if I were to look at the last example the other way around, we are talking about an individual who probably may not have enough hours, so he's asking for more hours, which would eventually goes to the his boss, who is again requires more projects, which again put pressure on the sales and marketing, who could again ask the rest of the team. So again, you're creating that loop over there, all the way from for the
Exactly.
individual team.
Yep.
Thanks. All right. And we are closer to our 30 minutes limit. So Anoop, I'll let you go. I know you have an extremely busy day planned ahead. So thank you so much for spending the 30 minutes with me and our audience. It was great having you on our first podcast. Thank you so much, Anoop.
Same here,
And
Jomal.
everybody,
Thanks for having me on your show.
and
Thank you.
everybody, I'll be back soon with another episode of The Good, the Bad, and the Data. Thank you so much.